Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Lebanon is on fire. Israel's northern territory is also on fire. There are missiles raining down from Iran into the major capitals of Israel, including, of course, Tel Aviv and Haifa and various other cities. The Negev desert has been also attacked. There are attacks on Dimona, nuclear plants, both in Iran, Bushehr, of course, Dimona. These are just some of the things that we're seeing. There's a chaos emerging, which is, of course, culminated in the shutdown of the Hormuz Strait, which is now threatening to, of course, bring us all into the web of this war on Iran, which essentially America and Israel have perpetrated. With me in the studio, I have Dr. Haim Bresheth, historian, filmmaker, and a geopolitical analyst. Somebody who is very familiar with Israel from his own background and his own historical links to it, and a critic of Zionism, of course. And welcome to the show, Haim.
Thank you. Good to be back.
It's lovely to have you back, and you've been calling it out for quite some time. I mean, in our last gathering, well before the war began, you predicted maybe end of the 2025, beginning of 26, and it has come to pass. Now that you're seeing what's unfolding, what's your initial reaction to what you're seeing?
Well, I think the Americans and the Israelis must be cheesed off because they were told by their advisors that this is going to be a 2 to 4 day job before the Iranians do a regime change. And that didn't quite work, as you know. Well, remember that the Americans went into Iraq for a short while. You know, they said this to us and this to everyone, that this is an in and out. In the end, they stayed 8 years, had terrible losses, destroyed the country, killed about 1 million people. I mean, it's one of those terrifying genocides that the Americans have actually committed after Vietnam. So, and mind you, when they went into Vietnam, it was just for a short while. So the Americans have a tendency to want very short and successful wars, and they get the opposite. The Israelis also live on the memory of the 6-day war. And actually wars normally don't take 6 days, not even 12 days. They're long events. It's easy to get in. It's almost impossible to get out. And this is the situation they're in now. Now, Netanyahu can thrive on this because he needs a forever war. And he kind of initiates one war after the other. And he doesn't want a period without war because that will be the end of his career. And that end will be in jail, probably. And he hasn't answered the questions that everyone in Israel is asking. How did we fall so badly on the 7th of October? People want to know why the army didn't react, why they didn't react to the fact that they were told there will be an attack by the Egyptians and by their own people on the line and the rest of it, why it took 10 hours for help to arrive to those kibbutzim and to the fortresses on the line. So people are unhappy about it. However, Israelis are now so well trained in Netanyahu followership that 90% of them support the war in Iran, though they support it from underground, from underground car parks and shelters and so on. I just seen an interview before I came, not an interview, an explosion of the mayor of a town called Kiryat Shmona, which is under attack all the time by Hezbollah missiles. It has about 20,000 people, more than half of them have already fled. And he was exploding online and say, you want us to stay here and, you don't help us? you don't give us anywhere to go, and you want us to stand up to Hezbollah. We are civilians, yeah? So he was very, very angry about the Israeli government total lack of attention to what happens to people under the fire that they have attracted. And this is the situation everywhere in Israel. I mean, I'm in daily contact with Israelis who are anti-Zionist, and they are actually sharing the locations of the missiles, and now they can't keep up because Trump comes online and says, oh, it's all the boats are at the bottom of the sea and missiles are gone and, we killed all the leaders. They've got nothing. And actually, then you look at what is happening, and with that nothing that they've got, they're actually shooting on the Gulf and Israel much, heavier than before. So I think people are starting to understand that those two madmen, Netanyahu is a kind of a satanic madman, and Trump, who is a clown, but a very, very evil clown, are actually destroying not just Iran and Lebanon and Palestine and Yemen and Iraq and the rest of the region, but they are destroying the world economy. They are destroying even the Israeli and American economy. And they are actually creating such havoc and chaos that it'll take decades to actually put it together again, if it's at all possible. So this is a turn of events none of them was prepared for. And I think what I can see is Trump trying to get an off-ramp. He's inventing talks with the Iranians. You remember he started about 10 days ago telling the world with a lot of spelling errors about a witch. He told us that everything is fine. We're going to be out and everything. They accepted all our conditions and so on. And then, of course, the Iranians said, we're not talking to you. Forget it. We're not accepting any of your conditions. So he's trying to get out of it and to say that he won. And as usual, he's killed everyone. He's destroyed everything, like he did in the 12-Day War. Now, if you destroyed everything on the 12-Day War, why do you have to destroy it again? Sure. That's Trump. But Netanyahu won't let him. Netanyahu watches him like a hawk. And I don't know if it's the Epstein files or what they have. They're obviously holding him by a tender part of his body, and they won't let go. So at the moment, it seems that Netanyahu controls Trump totally. And whenever Trump tries to be victorious and leave and get his Nobel Prize for ending 25 wars and the rest of it, Netanyahu stops him midway. So it's an odd situation because there's no way of telling how long this can go.
Well, it does seem fascinating that the Americans are committing more forces on the ground. That seems almost inevitable now. Ground troops have been rumored to be landing in various different places. The United Arab Emirates has been touted as a base for launching it. The United Arab Emirates have turned around now and said, we're not doing anything, it's not us. But there are these kinds of, the fog of war, the propaganda, the lies, the doublespeak is all happening. But the Iranians seem to be absolutely focused. They hit the major base in Saudi Arabia, I think, a couple of times, knocking out many American aircraft. An F-35 has been hit. That's the first time ever. The myth of the great naval carriers being some sort of weapon that could bring Iran to heel or open the Hormuz, that's pretty much off the table. So the war seems, the conventional war, it seems as though Iran had a strategy prepared, and it seems that they're implementing it pretty successfully, yet Netanyahu still wants more. You'd have thought that the decimation of Israel was something that he didn't want, but he seems adamant on destroying not only Iran, but also getting Israel completely dismantled at this rate.
I don't think he wants Israel destroyed, but he doesn't care. So it's a different kind of setup. I mean, if the war in Iran came to an end, despite Netanyahu, and that's possible always, he will find another country to. They are preparing an attack on Turkey. They will attack Egypt. They will attack Saudi Arabia. I mean, all these are mentioned by different Israeli politicians daily. So they're actually talking about attacking. They're mad enough to talk about attacking Pakistan. So these people are not really balanced. But the thing about the Israeli, what worries me is not them winning, because they're not going to win against Iran. You remember that there was a debate in the American army in 2003, before going into Iraq, how many people to commit in the army. And Rumsfeld wanted 20,000 people. And, you know, the army told him, we need 350,000, sir. And he said, no, no, no. And they've argued this, and that delayed the war. And in the end, they took about 130,000 to begin with. And then they did what they call the surge. They added and added and added and had 250,000 people in Iraq. Now, they can't do that in Iran. At the moment, they committed something like 15,000. I mean, these people are already dead if they move.
Why can't they do that in Iran?
Well, you remember that the Iraqi army stopped fighting before it started in a way. So what Iran has, which Iraq didn't have, is a committed army, the IRGC, yes, which is an ideologically committed. It's also Shia. So the idea of being a shaheed is not alien to them. And they are going to fight after seeing the country destroyed. Yeah, they're probably, people in the family were killed or hurt. A lot of Tehran lies in ruin. The anger in Iran meant that a lot of people that wanted to get rid of the government because they are in disagreement, either because they are not Muslim enough, or because they think the government is limiting their freedom, which it does, they wanted to get rid of that government. They want be shot of it. But actually, a lot of them, you see a lot of people, especially young people, saying, I have acted in the United States, in Britain, in France, etc., against the Iranian government for 15 or 20 years. All my adult life, and I was wrong, and they cry on the clip and say, after seeing what the Israelis and the Americans have done to Iran and to those amazing cities like Isfahan and Qom and so on, Tehran, of course, I understand that I was wrong. And this government is protecting Iran better than any of the other governments that are attacked. The Lebanese government is not protecting Lebanon. It's actually, working with the Israelis. So a lot of the people that were not really supportive of the Iranian government are now totally behind it. This is quite an achievement for the Israel.
So they galvanized Iranian people,
sure,
which makes it harder for the Americans to do what they did in Iraq as well.
And you remember that in the 12-day war, the same thing happened. And then we were told next time it won't happen because we are going to do regime change in few days. And the figure was 4 days. And, so they killed all the leadership, and not just the leadership, but their family and so on. I mean, those people are murderers. They abduct a head of state from Venezuela. They kill heads of state in Iran, and they brag about it as if it was a nice thing to do, and more should be done in this. And Trump even brags about the fact that there are lots of people that we could speak to, but we already killed them. I mean, this is the joke now. And if that's a joke, then the people who actually utter it are totally deluded.
So the on-the-ground situation, you talk to people in Israel and you're in touch with what's going on there. Kiryat Shimona is interesting because it's, of course, on the borders of occupied Palestine and occupied Lebanon, in fact, right in the...
And occupied Syria. It's
occupied
exactly
Syria,
in
right
the corner.
It's a fascinating point. First of all, is surprising because we were told across legacy media that Hezbollah was finished, that the Israelis had damaged them so heavily, and therefore there was no real problem there anymore, and there was a disarmament process. But what we're seeing on the ground, what I'm picking up is that at least between 51 and 100 Merkava tanks have been hit, destroyed, and the Israeli leadership, some of the senior officers are saying, actually, we can't get replacements, we need reinforcements, and we can't recruit them. What's the morale like within the IDF or on the ground in terms of the military and the people?
I think after the first month, which just finished, Israelis realized that they've been taken for a ride. So some people are now very vociferously against the war. At the moment, the police is controlling all demos, arresting all demonstrators, warning people not to get into demonstrations at all because they'll be, they know they'll be beaten up. They don't say that, but they're very brutal. Even more than the German or British police are, which is saying something.
True.
But at the moment, people are so tired and so flabbergasted by not sleeping. They don't go to work because it's not safe to take to the traffic. A lot of cars were destroyed on the road while driving, etc. Not only by missiles, but also by debris. There's a lot of debris. You can destroy a missile, but you create, many other smaller missiles that can actually kill people in a car, etc. So this is going on all the time, and the debris is mainly of the intercepts. The intercepts themselves are producing a lot of debris, and they're short of intercepts. So everyone knows that they are short of intercepts because you can see the whole. It's a light and sound show. You see it above Tel Aviv, above Jerusalem, above Beersheba, Haifa, etc. I get a lot of stuff from Palestinians in around Ramallah, etc. And you are looking at Israel down there, by the sea, and you see the light show over Tel Aviv, and you see there are not enough intercepts. Now, to produce those intercepts, normally they produce 2 a week. Now, okay, well, that is a joke.
No.
Even if they produce 200 a week, well, they're using them in one evening on...
Iran says it's capable of producing 400 drones a day. There's some, I don't know whether that's true, but they certainly seem to be able to.
True. I think hundreds anyway.
Yeah.
And they are very cheap. And of course, there is a financial element here. If you shoot a THAAD or one of those Israeli systems called a David Sling or Arrow, the Arrow 3 is a few $1 million. So in order to shoot something that costs $20,000, you use a missile that costs $3 million.
Sure.
You already shot yourself in the foot. And also, not only does it cost all this money, it takes a long time to produce. So what Iran is doing is actually destroying with little expense and little effort the Israeli system, not just of the intercept, but the production is not able to catch up. So on the whole, this is a third world shooting the first world successfully. Now, bad feet in the ground, boots in the ground. Basically, the minute that you put people on the ground on Iranian territory, they're ready for them. The IRGC has cut its teeth in 8 years' war with Saddam. This is a very experienced force. This is not the Iraqi army that kind of disappeared almost immediately. This is a force which is not like the American. The Americans didn't have any experience, any real experience in the field for decades. And the experience they had before, either in Vietnam or after that in Afghanistan and Iraq, was a failure. So there's not a lot that you can say about.
And these current commanders, I would have thought, would have been in Syria and Iraq up against ISIS. So they're battle hardened and they have strategic and tactical skills and awareness and experience. Whereas the Americans, maybe they've gone into Afghanistan, but again, that's a different kind of war.
Well, it wasn't a success story in Afghanistan. No, they had to run out.
Sure.
But also, I mean, in terms of motivation, I suspect the Iranians are motivated. Why the Americans are motivated to kill Iranians, I wouldn't know. And I don't believe that this is a strong motivation that will last a bitter, a bitter exchange with the first time they actually have a real battle with
There's
Iranians.
a hint, of course, that the suspicious withdrawal of some of the aircraft carriers, there are rumors that a lot of the personnel were actually blocking the toilets, for instance, on, I think it was the Abraham Lincoln or the Ford, one of those, and that there was a real demoralization within the ranks of the American forces.
They even started a fire on board.
Right.
Unless you agree with the Iranians that they shot it with a missile, the Americans said, no, they never shot us. It was a fire. The fire took 3.5 days to put out. And the boat is on the way back to the United States because none of the ports actually can service it anywhere else. So this is a joke. I mean, they're fighting with carriers. This is Second World War stuff. The Iranians don't have carriers and don't need carriers. They have, third world outfit that is fighting a first world inflated outfit.
I suppose mines, underwater submarines, those kind of speedboats that we often hear about, they've obviously created an asymmetric strategy to even deal with the naval blockade. And so if the Americans were to land troops on Karg Island, or even if they were to do it in Makran down in the south, it seems like all bases are covered. And the geography of Iran concerns me for any army that tries to make a long-term landing in Iran. With 1 million strong Iranian military, well-equipped, it's not going to be a walk in the park, is it?
Well, they will be immediately surrounded and they'll be very isolated. It will be almost impossible to get them out by helicopters. You remember what happened in 1980 when the Americans tried to do this in Iran in the desert and the helicopters were all shot and they were captured and it took years to get them out and the rest of it. Of course, most Americans don't have a memory for that or don't know where Iran is, I suspect. But, and I don't know if Trump has a mind to attend to this. But the army must have had someone that told him that this is dangerous, but he's just listening to Netanyahu and the Mossad.
And we were talking about the morale in Israel, but Iran, I'm seeing videos of Iranian people actually out demonstrating daily, even though bombs are flying. And conversely, I'm seeing Israelis crying in bunkers. And it's still, in terms of being able to cope with the war, it seems as though the Iranian people as well are resilient enough and want their government to go all the way on this.
Let's not forget that the Iranian people are suffering terribly. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. But that in itself is not saying that they will give up. In a sense, what they're saying, we are not going to give up, because if we give up now, we'll have it again and again and again when we're fed up and we want it finished. We want to end the sanctions. They understand that what the government is doing is the only thing they can do. And the fact that it's still going on, and Iran is not reacting, but actually acting and initiating and dictating the moves. The fact that Iran is now in control of the Straits, not just militarily, but also financially.
Yes.
And this is helping.
They're charging $2 million for any ship that's $2 million for any ship that's going through. They're allowed to pass their own oil. That's been unsanctioned. The Americans are actually unsanctioned because they need oil. The lack of oil is going to cause another disaster economically. So it seems as though Russians are now selling more oil. The Iranians are selling oil again freely. They've managed to galvanize the Iranian people into a solid mass behind the government establishment. They failed in regime change, like the new commanders seem to replace effortlessly. They failed in terms of getting any insurgency to take action. So the Kurds were being touted and others, and Azeris. That doesn't seem to have materialized. So is it desperation time for Trump?
Well, there are some other things which we should mention. And the Americans took 60 years building a network of bases in Arabia, in the GCC. These bases are, finished. Yeah. They can't use them probably for many years, if at all. The expensive radars that gave Israelis, for example, 20 or between 18 and 20 minutes, alarm time to get into undercover. Now Israelis are getting 20 seconds
notice.
So the 20-second notice is just enough to hit yourself against the wall. Yeah. This guy, the mayor of Kiryat Shmona, was going on about this. He said, "What can you do with in 20 seconds? You can get people from the 10th floor, 80-year-old people who are not able to walk." With their Zimmer frame, you can get them down in 20 seconds. So, I mean, obviously, this is the devastation in Israel. And what we don't know, but it's coming out now, that the devastation is not just in the center of Tel Aviv. In the center of Tel Aviv is the headquarters of the IDF. And it suffered a number of hits.
Right.
Dimona suffered a number of hits. There's a place called Ramat Chovav near Beersheba, and there is a large chemicals plant there, which is producing chemicals for
ammonia,
bombs and so on. And also other chemicals like, for agriculture, which is very much in short supply because of the straits being blocked. This is still, a fire is still burning in this chemicals factory after about 10 days. There is a very, very severe set of devastation in Israel, and this will turn the population against Netanyahu. It hasn't happened yet seriously, but I think also in the United States, now that some of the coffins are arriving, in Israel, by the way, they don't tell anything about those tanks you referred to. And those tanks, okay, they're a write-off, but the 4 people of each tank have not survived in all likelihood. No news about any of this. The Israelis don't know that.
So the disinformation war is being maintained, I guess.
Totally, total censorship.
Yeah. I remember you broke it to me that very early, before even mainstream media decided to say anything, that a lot of the Israelis prior to the previous war as well, were already doing a mass exodus to places like Cyprus. How's that developing?
Well, they have resolved this by actually allowing only about 5 flights a day.
Okay.
And 50 people on each flight, because they said it's not secure. Indeed, it's not secure because the attacks on the airport are daily.
Right.
But also, they don't want people to leave Israel. they're short of soldiers. They called up 450 people to fight in Lebanon. 450,000 people.
Wow.
Now that's more than the United States had at any time in Iraq. Now Iraq is a huge country. Lebanon is a trap for any army. And in 2006, they put 120,000 people into Lebanon, and many of them were butchered because it's a mountainous area. Very, there are IEDs, there are ambushes put up for those tanks. That's how they get the tanks. Now they want to put 450,000 people in. They're mad. They can't do it. And they haven't even started properly. And already almost 100 tanks were destroyed. So I don't think that either this boots on the ground operation or the one planned by the Americans are well thought and prepared.
They're not obviously going to. The Israelis have already said more or less that we're not going to be part of the invasion of Iran. So
why should they? I mean, they don't want to lose people. The Americans are doing everything. They've got a subcontractor. They're the real head of the empire. The tail is wagging this dog very successfully. And I said from the beginning, the Israelis are not going to send people to Iran because it's not safe. They'll get the Americans to die first. They will fight to the last American. And there are lots of Americans to go through. So why should we send any of our boys, they say?
Well, two other worrying factors for the Americans and the Israelis are that Yemen joined the war this week. They fired ballistic missiles at Eilat and even Tel Aviv, I think. That's significant because it brings into question the Bab al-Mandeb, and already with the chokehold that Iran is exercising in the Straits of Hormuz, which cuts 20% of the world's energy supplies, you've got another 10-15% that goes through the Bab al-Mandeb and the Red Sea, and that chokehold is in the hands of the Yemeni Ansarullah. So that's another factor that's going to surely put pressure, not only the world economy, but also Israel, because they're going to have to face attacks from that side.
But also, it's really not just the world economy, but the American economy is suffering because you don't buy petrol now in petrodollars. You buy it in Chinese currency.
That's what Iran has implemented?
Yeah. So now the de-dollarisation campaign that BRICS has started quietly against SWIFT, against the banks, against the dollar. Yeah, the most important weapon of the Americans is the dollar.
Yes,
and now they're hitting the dollar. This will come to haunt America very, very soon. First of all, they are paying more for petrol, and that is something they understand and are very irate about. There is an election coming, both for Netanyahu and for Trump at the same time in November. There are those two elections. For Trump, it's a midterm. For Netanyahu, it's a fight for life, because if he loses the election, the Commission of Inquiry will start working. He stopped it until now. And if his enemies on the, in Israel, the opposition, supposedly, they're not in opposition, they are totally in cahoot with the government. But they hate Netanyahu and they want to take over. If they manage to take over, and that's very likely now, it's a touch and go, Netanyahu will be in jail in a short order. So I think both of them have got everything to lose. And Trump, of course, probably plans to end elections altogether. This war is not going to help him in doing that or in actually winning. So both of them are facing, a crossing in the road that they don't like to even think about. But the longer the war goes on, the closer it gets to the election.
Let's move on to the region, because Iran has been very clever in the way it seems to have deployed its tactics. This diffusion tactic, strategically, they're putting the heat on their neighbors. So all those US bases that you mentioned earlier are an attack on US bases primarily, but they also now include attacks on infrastructure, some of it which is being blamed on Israel as false flags in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar or whatever, but also
Cyprus as well.
Cyprus, of course, yes. And of course, Iran is denying some of those attacks, but it does seem some of them, they're actually saying, well, we're going to give tit for tat, because if you hit our universities, if you hit our schools, if you hit our electronics and the firms that produce goods and material, I think they hit a dairy yesterday. It was ridiculous. But then they said, oh, that dairy belongs to the IRGC. So we're destroying their means of income. Some bizarre stuff. The targets are bizarre in Iran, certainly. And Iran is retaliating primarily with military targets, but they're also saying, well, we should cut loose now as well and start hitting your infrastructure. Desalination plants, for instance, the energy supply, that's the big one that Trump threatened to do and then backed off. So they're now talking about war crimes very openly, and they're talking about targeting civilian populations on a mass level. Let's talk about the Gulf monarchies, because Qatar seems to have had the jitters. They've suddenly started backtracking a little and almost trying to tell Trump and co to stop the war somehow. On the other hand, it seems off the record, bin Salman from Saudi Arabia has been actually encouraging the Americans and the Israelis. So there's an interesting dance going on between these Zionist Gulf Arab monarchists and their fight for survival. What do you think is going to happen within that context?
Look, if the Iranians were that way minded, they could take over the Emirates and Kuwait, and because these entities, I don't know what to call them, they're not really states. They're not polities in the way that we know. Most of the people there are not citizens and have no rights. 5% of the population has citizen rights in the Gulf states. So they don't have an army. They have Americans supposedly there to defend them, but they're not doing anything. Yeah. So, Iran could walk in and take over Kuwait, the Emirates, etc., because, of course, the emir is not in Kuwait or not in Abu Dhabi. They are in Egypt, in Riyadh, some of them even further away. So basically, there's nothing to defend them now that the Americans have clarified that they're not fighting to defend those people who gave them so stupidly access to their land and their sea. In
fact, Trump has just said that he wants trillions from them to fight this war for them. So he wants more money.
Well, for Trump, it's all about money and basically private money rather than money to the exchequer of the United States. He wants private money. And the two Jewish businessmen that he sends around are part of his empire as well, financial empire.
Mr. Kushner and Witkoff, is it?
Yeah, so we're talking about something that has never happened before since the Roman, most Roman emperors didn't behave in that way. They actually were real emperors of the empire. This is a kind of Caligula time. But basically, what we see now is not only that the Iranians could walk in to Kuwait or to Qatar or to Abu Dhabi, but actually you can see a time where the people, in other words, the people without any rights, can arise and say, we don't want this.
In Bahrain, there's a strong possibility because there's a majority Shia population ruled by these kinds of Wahhabi dictator monarchs, and the people are rising. Kuwait hardly has a population of Arabs, as does Qatar. They're, as you say, minorities. So they are really just superficial states, but with a huge amount of wealth. And Iraq, of course, I need to bring Iraq into this because there has been an indication that the government is allowing the PMUs, popular mobilization units, which defended Iraq against ISIS, they've been given the green light to say they can also now actively take part in the war because they are ostensibly part of the Iraqi army. And now that they're in the fray, that possibility of a war on Gilani, perhaps, who's also really siding with the Americans and the Israelis in Syria, a war on the Kuwaitis and all these guys who are still allowing US bases. They haven't said we're not going to have US bases. It's still very possible that the axis of resistance, as you say, could do land sort of ground warfare on these states.
Well, the boss isn't in the business and the door is open, and it is quite tempting for some people. It might be. So let's think about what causes this. What causes this is, 3 or 4 decades of a Western position of creating chaos in the whole region so that Israel can be the hegemon in the Middle East. Now, that works for Israel, the fact that, somebody from Al-Qaeda is now running Syria, that Iraq is not a polity or, it's basically a basket case, like Libya before it, like, Syria now. I mean, basically, they are destroying one country after another, and as countries lift their head over the parapet, they get shot. And Iran, of course, is there because it supports Palestine, but actually Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a 93 million people industrialized state, modern state. The kind of picture of Iran that we get in the media in this country or in the United States is a caricature.
Yeah.
Iran is a very this is supposedly an Islamophobe dream. A country that is in the Middle Ages and so on. Actually, we see how their products are hitting the Gulf and Israel and the Americans, and in many ways they are superior. Their products, the military products, are superior, and they are cheaper and they are faster to produce and the rest of it. So I think the system of turning the Middle East into a bunch of basket case states has been successful for quite a while. They notched a lot of kills in the Middle East. Syria is the last one. But, and of course, Lebanon was never back into a state after the Israelis left in 2006. So Syria is gone, Lebanon is gone, Iraq is gone, and of course Libya before, East Africa. And they want now to remove Iran because Iran is the most powerful.
Yes.
And if they remove Iran, they can actually start thinking about Pakistan and Turkey. Now, Turkey, apparently, being a NATO country, is an enemy of the United States now because anyone who is Netanyahu's enemy is an enemy of the empire.
Yes.
So this is a trap you can't get out of. Right. Because there's never a bottom to this barrel. The more you dig into that barrel to remove societies, the more societies you have to destroy.
Well, two other areas that I want to touch before we conclude in the program. One is the evident defeat of Israel and America in soft power terms, because we're seeing another level of sophisticated propaganda from Iranians. I've seen animations, the spokesperson for the Khatam al-Anbiya, the way he's delivering his message, directly talking to Trump and saying, you're fired. There's some very clever optics going on there. But also, is it just inevitable, given that Israel and America, with the genocide that they've committed in Palestine, have already lost currency? They've lost sort of social capital or any kind of credibility in the world as a whole. And now when they've launched an attack on Iran straight after this genocide, there's kind of no real, amongst the populace of much of the world, there's no real traction for believing anything Israel and America say.
Well, let's talk about America first. There's always a kind of red line, which is invisible. How much can you lose when getting to a point that you cannot recoup it?
Right.
Yeah. So you can lose a little, and then you can recoup it by changing position and say, okay, we made a mistake, or even we're sorry that we made a mistake. But this is all in the past, yeah? They've passed all the red lines with Gaza. And with Gaza, they showed what the method and how they are going to work. And now it is Gaza in Tehran, there's Gaza in Isfahan, there's Gaza in Lebanon. Yes. 1 million people left the south. In Iran itself, there's about 5 million refugees. There are refugees in the Gulf. There are refugees in Israel.
Yes.
While it is fighting all those wars, it creates refugees at home.
Yes.
And those refugees are not going to go back.
That's the migrant time bomb that's going to be...
Sure.
Yeah, it's waiting.
So this is a time bomb for Europe, not for the States, but for Europe. Because if those people leave Iran and leave Lebanon, they are going to Europe. That's the first port of call. So that's what the Americans have created in their modality of the madmen of the neighborhood. Yeah, don't touch me because I can be very dangerous kind of stuff. So add to the stupidity of attacking Iran and the criminality of attacking Iran, add the fact that Trump has, before doing that, has totally imbalanced the whole world economy with his tariffs, with saying, I want this country, I want that country, I want this and I want that, and I'm going to run Venezuela, I'm going to take the president, I can do what I like. The whole international system, not just the legal system, which they shot to pieces, but the financial system, the system of communication between states, the system of the UN, of negotiating before disaster, there is a total system failure. So I don't think that this is possible to salvage. There's no salvage point in the United States. Now, Israel, of course, Israel is finished in the sense of soft power. They have no soft power. They are lying. It's all about beheaded babies and mass rapes, and we didn't suffer anything. You know, nobody died. Yeah. All these tanks have been destroyed.
Quite delusional in a way. Yeah.
The only person they allowed that is dead is someone that they shot themselves, a soldier, an officer that they shot themselves, and it was impossible to cover because it was in a public place. So I think Israel has no soft power. The one thing that worries me, and I keep saying this, and people say, why are you saying it? Don't talk about it. But I think
I know where you're going. This was my last question, but it's the inevitable one we're going to come to, is Armageddon, yeah.
Well, Armageddon is there for the simple reason that Israel cannot win. If it could win, it would be less dangerous to the world and even to Iran. But it cannot win. And it cannot win because of all that we have seen now, not just the last month, but the last few years. If Israel cannot actually cleanse Gaza of the resistance, or cleanse Lebanon of the resistance, or Yemen, which they bombed and bombed and bombed again. And they've done all that. They've done all they could. They kind of like said, don't annoy me because I can be dangerous. So they were dangerous. They would show their worth. And okay, they haven't actually finished the resistance anywhere. So they think they can actually finish Iran? It's a joke. Now, basically, they know this. And Netanyahu is a person that can be probably the only one to be trusted to use nuclear weapons. He's got between 300 and 400. They're not going to use one. And they said so. They're going to use tens of them and maybe more. Now, what worries me is the minute they start losing, they run out of intercepts, they have population pressure that puts political pressure on them to end the war, and they can't end the war because they're losing. That's the time that they'll take the Samson option out of the
it's like a wounded animal
basement, and that is likely to start a nuclear world war.
Goodness me. Well, it's a prospect. You'd have thought that that prospect would have already sent alarm bells to China, to Russia, the great powers, the other nuclear powers, and there would be some action. But there seems to be a lot of inactivity in terms of preventing that. Although Pakistan is running around trying to bring China in the equation now, and we'll have to wait and see what happens over the next week or two. But that is looming large, and I share your concern.
I'm very disappointed and frightened by Chinese and Russian behavior. Well, Russia has got its work cut out, of course, because it's involved in Ukraine. But the idea that they can do nothing and nothing will happen is wrong. They have to stop this. In a sense, they are now the new owner. The empire is declining fast. It's actually now in a free fall. So not just, don't talk about just the United States, but also Europe. Europe now has no oil because they have given up on the Russian pipelines and so on. They have put themselves into this quagmire, actively walked into it because of the United States and Ukraine. So there is a decline of the Western system. Their power is gone. And also the way they act, and not just Trump, who is a clown and acts like a clown, but even von der Leyen and all those, figures like Starmer and Macron and so on, they are clowns themselves. They actually behave as if you wouldn't give them a bicycle to keep overnight. So we have a system in free fall. And China and Russia should have walked into the driving seat and said, hang on, we're putting a stop to this. This has gone far enough. We're not allowing this to happen. Work through the UN, work through every agency that we can use, and we're putting a stop to this. Enough is enough. They haven't done the simplest thing to stop the genocide in Gaza. Now, let's agree that they don't care about the Palestinians, but they don't care about what happens now, about the Straits, etc., about the market, and they need that market. They are traders. It's a trading nation.
Sure.
The United States is not a trading nation in the same way, but China is a trading nation. Yeah. They have to stop it, and they're not doing it.
Well, on that note, I think that takes us to a kind of a very worrying point, but we have to, I guess, wait for events to unfold and pray and hope that some sanity is brought into the equation, though sanity and Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump are not concepts which really sit very comfortably around their behavior. But you'd have thought that the apparatus behind that would have taken some action. One of the more bizarre theories that gets thrown around is that there was something called Agenda 2030 and this whole idea of the neoliberal economic system failing globally, and almost like they need a collapse of the economy, that there are many powerful forces that actually would be quite happy with that, and the notion that the likes of America could be used, and Iran used in the trigger to create this collapse of the economy. It sounds very, very far-fetched to me, but the reality is it seems to be happening now. That's exactly where we're going. We're going to get an economic collapse. We're going to potentially get nuclear, radiation fallout, contamination of products and goods around the world. And that would clearly famine, migration, and more war seems on the card.
Environmental destruction.
Yeah, the ecocide that will go with this. It's not a very good look, and it's. I'm sad to say that we have to end the program on that note, but I'm afraid we need to all maybe take a wake-up pill. In a way, we in the West are culpable because we've nurtured Israel through the election of leaders who've nurtured Israel and who've allowed it to get as far as it has. The IAEA, Grossi, the president, said something very bizarre. He said that the only way to stop the Iranian nuclear program was to bomb it. Well, this is the IAEA
He should be in jail.
You know?
Not just sacked. He should be in jail for what he is doing and saying. He's an Israeli asset. He's a Mossad asset. He has always been that. He's provided Israel with information for years about those sites, and that's how they destroyed some of the scientists as well. He's identified the people, the key people for them. I think he actually is a war criminal. But the main crime is that he is fanning the fire instead of trying to stop it. And he's not going to change his mind more than Trump is going to change.
Well, we don't expect anything from Zaya Western legacy media. They're not going to fan this warning about nuclear Armageddon. They're in fact playing it down. You're not going to get it from, of course, the Anglo-Zionist political system. And it seems that it's down to independent media and individuals and the anti-war movement, the anti-imperialist movement in the West to really bang the drum harder to say, look, we may well be on the cusp of a nuclear Armageddon combined with an economic Armageddon, which will change the shape of the world. Whatever happens, the world is not going to be the same after this war, whatever the conclusion. But the worst case scenario, Haim, seems very, very frightening to me. Any last word from you on that?
I think what is important to me and to you is that we now have a system of alternative media that actually plugs the gaps left by the mainstream media, gaps of information, gaps of understanding, gaps of interpretation. And that's very important. People like you, there are hundreds and thousands now all over the world of independent media that the technology allows and enables. And now all of us who care are getting our information that way rather than from mainstream media. That is a new element that is helping people to understand what is going on in this very, very sad world that we live in.
Thank you, Haim. And I think the natural conclusion to our work in terms of independent media and the work of activists like Haim who want a better world and clearly have some rational common sense about it, is that there needs to be change at the grassroots level. They've disempowered you by creating demoralization and fear. Tony Benn said this quite famously in a speech I remember long ago. The demoralization and fear is what they use to incapacitate you and make you feel that you can't change things. You can. At the end of the day, change doesn't always have to be violent. Revolutions don't need to be violent. Sometimes they can just be withdrawing consent from established systems because you recognize those systems are corrupt and don't deserve your support. Certainly the political class here, the Epstein class, as Sayyid Mohammed Morandi very famously now puts it, are not on the side of your interests. They're on the side of the billionaire class. They seem to be on the side of those who plunder and pillage and are happy to create forever wars. And now they've brought us to the precipice of something all of us thought we were well past, a nuclear Armageddon. You need to act because they're not going to. I need to act. And I think we need to act collectively and put pressure on the leaders, sweep them aside if necessary. And I know it's hard to think about revolutions, but when your pocket is hit now, when your petrol is going to get so expensive, then you're not going to be able to do the kind of runs you've done. When your holidays are not on offer anymore because inflation is so high, when your food prices mean that you have to cut down budgets, I think then perhaps the chickens will have come home to roost, and maybe you'll wake up and be where Professor Haim and I are, which is saying that we're in a state of emergency, and we're not just kidding. There's a real serious problem, and it's down to us, the people, to take action to change it. The 8 million that gathered in America is a start. That's the No Kings movement. But even there, it's not about Trump, I don't think. It's not just about Netanyahu, about a few madmen and psychotics. It's about a system, the systemic problem which upholds these sort of people, elects these people, allows them to do what they do, ought to be also in our vision range and a target for us. I am advocating change and potentially revolution wherever it's necessary in order for the people to wrest back control and bring sanity back to this world and create a more harmonious society. Thank you to Professor Haim for joining us today, and thank you for watching. Do like, subscribe, share, and hype the video, because this message needs to go far and wide. No matter how much it's suppressed by the algorithms, we're relying again on you to act to get that message out so that more people wake up. Thank you for watching.